was over on that side, and obviously Britain being in Europe was more Atlantic Ocean based. So they pretty much had the Pacific to themselves outside of us, and that's why the whole thing with Pearl Harbor was a big deal. We had actually moved a lot of our sea-based stuff into Pearl Harbor from up in California, just to sort of have it there. Well, we weren't expecting a surprise attack, as who would be so audacious to do that? Well, they did, and they rocked us pretty hard. Fortunately for the United States, a lot of the carriers and stuff were not in dock at the time. They were out on maneuvers doing this and that. So as devastating as it was, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
And we still had a lot of our power. Japan also knew that due to our size, due to our industrial revolution, we'd been doing this a lot longer, that there was going to be a time when we ramped up and we would be able to pretty much stomp anybody by producing more weapons, producing more ships, producing more airplanes. But at the time when all this was going, we really hadn't ramped up for that. So they had the idea that they were going to finish off what they had started and bring this enormous naval armada into Midway first, and then further to Pearl Harbor, sort of before we get a chance to really ramp up and knock us out of the war, or at least make us come crawling to them and saying, hey, we want...
Right.
We don't want to carry this on, which was actually a great plan.
They were definitely strategic. That's...
Yeah, they were. I mean, they knew what they were doing or why they were doing it. The problem is they were starting to get spread a little bit thin, so... Which is the problem with everybody. I mean, Germany, once you start spreading out, taking over the whole world, you can't be everywhere at once. So
right.
There lies a problem in all these people trying to get too ambitious instead of
that goes the whole thing about global domination. It's almost impossible just because of that fact.
Right.
Yeah.
So Japan was thinking about doing all this in May of 1942, which is about 5 months after Pearl Harbor. They got their first little setback in what's called the Battle of the Coral Sea. It was basically a stalemate, and it was actually the first naval battle that took place completely with aircraft, because aircraft carriers were becoming very big and very important. And what's important to know before we ever get into the Battle of Midway is that the planes that take off the aircraft carriers are limited in a number of things. One is where they can land and where they can take off. I mean, it's obviously a very small space. So they have to be able to make sure that they can go out and get back to that carrier with enough fuel. Depending on what they're attacking, if you're attacking a land-based target, you would have different bombs and weapons than you would if you were attacking a ship. So if you're attacking a ship, you might have a torpedo that you drop, and a torpedo is obviously not going to do anything if you're going against somebody land-based.
Right.
So we knew that this battle was coming. They knew the battle was coming. The Battle of the Coral Sea was pretty much a stalemate. The Japanese won it pretty much tactically, but they suffered like on an operation level, and they didn't accomplish what they wanted to. They had to pull back. They didn't invade the base at New Guinea that they'd hoped to, because they really wanted to set up a land-based place so that they didn't have to go all the way back. Obviously the problem with having a carrier is you are limited to that carrier.
Right.
Whereas if you had a land-based thing, which is why Midway was important to us and why they wanted it, they wanted a place where they could set up and not have to travel so far, where they could actually have room to spread out, get more things going on. For instance, on a carrier, if all your planes are coming back after an attack, you can't be taken off, because obviously that would be suicidal. And once they got back, they've all got to fuel up, but there's only so much space on the deck, so you are limited with things like that. But the Battle of the Coral Sea was the first time that this had been fought back and forth. One of the things that happened in the Coral Sea is one of our carriers, which is called the Yorktown, was horribly damaged, and it limped back to Pearl Harbor. And when they first assessed it, put it this way, there's not a whole lot of secrets when you destroy another person's ship. I mean, it was to the point where the Japanese knew this thing was out of commission. It came back to Pearl Harbor, and the guys assessing it said it's going to take 3 weeks to get this back into commission. Well, probably the biggest thing to the Battle of Midway is that we had actually broken the Japanese codes, and we were intercepting them. And we knew that there was this attack that was imminent. We weren't exactly sure where, but they had kind of figured out maybe it was Midway. And to double check that they did, they'd actually sent something out, like, urgent message, uncoded, that they were running out of water. Well, shortly thereafter, there was a code coming from the Japanese saying that this base that they said they were going to hit is in desperate need of water. So that's how they knew this was going to go on. So the Americans knew approximately within 1 day when this was going to take place. They knew that they could lay a little bit of a trap for the Japanese, and they really needed this third carrier. They had 2 carriers that were operational. They really wanted the third. the general or the admiral at the time, who's Nimitz. You might have heard of him. He's got a nuclear sub, I think, named after him now. Talked to the guys at Pearl Harbor, said, we need this. Put 1,400 men on this boat, and they turned it around in 2 days. 3 weeks worth of things. They turned this thing, working around the clock, 1,400 men, set it back out to sea. So now we have a third carrier.
I'm sure
out
it
there.
Wasn't fully. This is probably a little sketchy, but
I tell you what, the more and more I watch these things, it's amazing how many times that they could hit these things and keep them operational. But anyway, this is a third carrier, and the Japanese have no idea this one's even going to be in the battle.
Mm-hmm.
So Japan had this.
They see it coming. Is that a ghost? You shouldn't be here.
We just killed you.
So let me back up a little bit first. The Midway is an atoll. Do you know what an atoll is? ATOLL.
It's like seen that? It's like an area that's surrounded by land or like something blocking where the water's still, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a ring-shaped reef, island, or chain of islands formed of coral.
Okay.
So they have a tendency to be very flat too. So it became a very good place to set up this base. We actually we being U.S. had taken formal possession of the atoll in 1867, and named it Midway because of its location between the United States. It's actually the furthest most little island out past Hawaii, but it's a territory that isn't part of Hawaii. So the U.S. claimed it as a territory. We annexed it. There were some guys from a cable company in 1903 that went out and started setting up this company. They were going to try to get a trans-Pacific telegraph cable set. There was a lot of Japanese poachers on the island that would come to the island and things like that. Same year as that, the president at the time, Roosevelt, Teddy, stationed 21 Marines on the island, and that was the beginning of this military base. And so over the years, it kind of grew into the point where by beginning in 40, as the tensions were starting to rise, and we realized that that we might have to think about Japan, it was pretty much deemed like second in importance to Pearl Harbor to protect our west coast. It was sort of like the first stopping point. So airstrips, gun emplacements, and seaplane base quickly materialized on this atoll, which, by the way, is a 2.4 square mile. So it's not big whatsoever.
No. Wow.
Yeah.
So anyway, here's the deal. Japan has got this plan. They have got this massive navy that they are going to send out pretty much everything they've got, which includes the planes on there. And at that time too, they had developed the Japanese Zero, which you've probably heard about, which was probably the lightest, quickest plane in the air. And we really had no defense for that per se. It had a lot of fatal flaws, and once we finally captured one, we figured it out and were able to kind of neutralize it within about a 5-year period. But at the time, when you have a carrier, you've got different kind of planes too. So the Zeros were built to attack and defend, but not. And by that I mean other planes.
Right.
So when you send like planes off an aircraft carrier, you've got bombers that have one thing in mind. Well, the bombers are not necessarily the quickest and easiest to move around. They have a job to do. Well, the Zeros would help try to keep fighters.
Other planes. They're like dogfighters.
So I mean, there's the whole naval sea battle with the aircraft and stuff like that is absolutely fascinating. How they set all this stuff up.
What's like the TIE bombers? You have TIE bombers fucking come over the bombers, and you have the TIE fighters and the TIE interceptors who are supposed to be defending.
Yeah.
Right. It's exactly right. So
I hate that that's exactly right, but yes.
Well,
that is accurate though.
Yes, it's exactly accurate. So the idea that Japan had was that they were going to do 3 things. They were going to send this incredibly large fleet out that was going to come out. They were going to attack Midway and disable it. They were sending a separate armada of infantrymen who then would take it over. And then they figured that the United States... Well, first of all, before this happened, they were actually going to hit the islands up on the south of Alaska, where we had some very minor bases. The Pearl Harbor fleet would head there because we would react to this.
Right.
The Pearl Harbor fleet would head there, not knowing what was happening at Midway. By the time that Midway was overtaken, the fleet would turn this way. And that's when they would just destroy them because we knew the Japan knew that we would be coming to the rescue.
Right.
Because we'd broken this code, and because the islands up in the Aleutian Islands near Alaska were not all that important, they basically just said, whatever, you can have them. And in the meantime, we had sent all these carriers a little bit to the north of the Midway Islands. They were about 350 miles away, sitting there where nobody knew they were. Japan had no idea that these guys were already in position and waiting on them.
Yeah.
So they've got this nice little 3-prong idea in mind. They're going to hit the island, take over the island, and then wipe out our Navy when it comes to the rescue.
Right.
the more and more I read about this, the more and more I think that, I don't want to say we were a little lucky with the way things worked out, with timing, with this, that, and the other. We knew these guys were coming. The morning of June 3rd, we had sent a squadron of fighters out, and they had actually located the Armada. Not the main Navy, but the guys didn't know it wasn't the main Navy.
Right.
They attacked this Armada pretty ineffectually, didn't do a whole lot of damage. Japan should have known right then and there that something was up. But they didn't know that we were breaking their code, but they thought that we were getting into the radio signals. So they were operating at radio silence. The main Navy was never notified that we had attacked this Armada. So far, so good as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Now, the next morning, they take off like they're supposed to. They sent 108 aircraft in towards Midway in 3 waves. There was 3 sets of different kind of planes. Again, we kind of knew they were coming. The forces put up a brave defense, but our aircraft was mostly antiquated, not up to speed with Japan's. They put a pretty bad hit on it. The one thing they weren't able to do is they weren't able to take the runways out. So on their way back, and we're talking like, an hour flight back and forth.
Right.
They did radio and say, hey, we're going to have to put a second hit on this place to disable it, which was not in their plans, but it's like, okay, we got to do what we got to do. So they're on their way back. Well, our first 2 squadrons head out there, but they were a lot of slow planes. They were mostly inexperienced pilots. They weren't coming in at a good height. So the aircraft from Japan were able to, then there were 4 of them. So they had 4 major aircrafts. We tried to bomb them. They were very quick in maneuvering and moving around. They also just destroyed our first 2 platoons that came in. I mean, literally obliterated them, which sounds really bad. If you're Japan, well, you've beat the crap out of them at Midway already. You're going back to finish them up. These planes have come in. You pretty much decimated them. Everything's all well and good. The only problem with that is they used a lot of resources. They had used a lot of their plane stuff. They needed to refuel and get ready to go back to Midway to finish off. So they get those planes back. The planes are starting to come back from their attack on Midway to begin with, and they're fueling up, getting them ready to go. One of the Japanese aircrafts, the spotter aircrafts, happens to see one of our carriers, which was the Yorktown, and reports back that they see this ship. Well, the admiral of the Japan Navy is like, there shouldn't be anybody out there. What the heck's going on? He doesn't know it's a carrier at this point in time, just knows that there's some ships out there. So he's got the guys, come on, get ready, loading up the bombs to go back to Midway. Report comes back 15 minutes later, hey, this is a carrier. He puts 2 and 2 together and figures, well, they shouldn't be there, but you know what? This is the chance I have to put the Navy out of commission.
Yeah.
Orders everybody to unload, reload, so they can go after the ships. Turned out to be a really, really bad mistake on his part. Our second squadrons had come. These guys were a little bit more seasoned. They came in at the right height, so they actually came up.
First guys are just guinea pigs.
Yeah, as it turned out, yes, but it actually bought some time. And so now you've got all these people reloading, refueling, reloading, refueling. The Japan carriers now have got a bunch of ships that are in the midst of reloading. They've got all these bombs on them. They are refueled. They're basically...
So they're set up to bomb, not to...
They are set up to be bombed.
Most of them, most of them are not prepared to dogfight.
Right. So when our second ones come in, and this is where we had 3 squadrons go out, and the first squadron had not been able to find them because they had redeployed to going after the carriers. So instead of going straight to Midway, they'd turned. Well, by the time they realize that they're not where they're supposed to be, the guy's got a choice. He can either turn around because they've only got so much fuel, or he can take a guess and say maybe they're over here, which is what he does. That turned out to be absolutely probably the best thing that ever happened to us. I mean, that's why I say a stroke of luck. I mean, he could easily have said, I got to go back because I don't know where the hell they are, and I'm going to run out of fuel.
Right.
So at the same time, the squadrons are coming in from the one side that knew where they were. He's coming from another. We basically go in, and within a matter of minutes, we have destroyed 3 of their carriers. They are just absolutely ablaze.
Wow.
And by the next morning, they were sunk. Now they did with their 4th carrier, who had been lagging behind, and we hadn't seen that. From there, they actually sent a huge fleet of their warriors out to get the Yorktown. They knew we knew they were coming. We put a big hit on them, but in the meantime, they had managed to hit it pretty badly too, and put it out of commission. And then the next day, they were able to torpedo that and sink it.
They sunk our battleship?
Well, our carrier.
Well, that's the fiver.
That's the 5, yeah.
Yeah, so the next day, let me go first real quickly. Just
That
to give you an
patrol boat's still
idea,
out there though. They just can't find that freaking patrol boat.
the numbers going in